Hey there, folks. Welcome to Storytime. I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. And I'm excited to be doing another scholar to come join me for a conversation today. And I'm going to go ahead and bring her in, Dr. Naomi Norton. Yes, hi. Thank you for joining us. It is fun to have you here with us today. And I'm actually going to ask you to introduce yourself, if you don't mind. Share whatever of your credentials you'd like folks to know about first, because I think it's helpful and important.
Yes, so I have a PhD in family therapy. It specializes in social justice and global diversity. And then I have an independent license to practice in Missouri and Kansas within marriage and family therapy.
Nice. And how long have you been doing this kind of work?
Well, I got my first license in 2014, so 10 years now.
Okay, yeah.
Then independent.
You're so young. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's impressive. You were doing it while you were a teenager? Yeah.
Right? I look back, I'm like, time is way too, it's weird.
Yeah. So I would love so let me just tell everyone, actually, I learned about you through a mutual friend. Megan South Benninger is someone that I connected with this past fall for reasons that are, well, it's related to the issues within religious settings, shall we say, and the abuse of power and the lack of listening to women's voices. I think that's probably fair to leave it at that. That's how she and I connected. And I'm really impressed with her as a person. She's very courageous, I think, and calling out things within the Southern Baptist Church. Anyway, so that's how she referenced you and your work, and actually the wheel that we'll be sharing with folks here in a minute. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is a woman I'd like to talk to. So I'm delighted you're here, and I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind, as we talked about, sharing a little bit about your background, whatever parts of your story. So content warning, folks, there might be some intense details being shared, perhaps. Yeah, who are you that led you to do this work, right?
Well, it's quite an interesting journey. Like reflecting back, it's been like so, I don't know, it's mind-boggling, I think, but also really cool. Because I grew up in the IFB culture, is the Independent Fundamental Baptist culture.
Okay.
It was a very closed system that if I wasn't home, I was at church. And I went to a school that was also associated with the church. And so it's like I was always in that space. And one of my very first moments that was very pivotal in my upbringing was about when I was 5 or 6 years old. We went to a Sunday night service and the pastor started talking about hell. And it was very descriptive. It was very much like gnashing of teeth and screaming and worms and just like a whole bunch of horribleness. And so I remember being so scared. And so then I go home and I pray the prayer, and then I get set on this trajectory of I'm going to be a missionary. I'm going to follow the straight and narrow. Like I have to do everything to make sure I'm okay, but everyone else has to be safe too, because I want people to be okay. And so that thread goes throughout a lot of my upbringing. Because I was a rule follower, like anything, like I had the nickname from my siblings was I was the angel. Like they would get so mad because someone tells me something, I'm going to do it. Like I can't not deviate.
Interesting.
And so looking back, I didn't realize how anxious I was and how scared that's like if I felt like I sidestepped just a little bit of what the culture of my family was telling me, then bad things would happen. And so it's like I was living in a constant state of fear.
I relate to so much of this. I just want to throw that out there. It's interesting to me how many important people that do really important work come from this kind of a background, not necessarily the same religious, but anyway, the personality. Anyway, please go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and the fear is so powerful that it's like if people can figure out ways to instigate some fear, it's like we will, and especially with our eternal well-being, like it's powerful.
It is powerful stuff. And you were
And
how
so
old with this? Sorry, there were things
I was
happening in my
about
mind.
5 to 6
Okay.
years old when I
Yeah.
was saved. Um, but then throughout my whole upbringing, I kept getting these messages because because I'm obedient and submissive, that now I'm a good child and everything is good and you're going to be okay and you have lots of discernment. Like, it was just a constant, like, when you're following, you're okay. And I mean, my family has some unique dynamics, which contributed to a lot of stuff, but it really didn't hit until I was in college. Like, I went to more of a fundamentalist Christian college that was in another state, because I grew up in Colorado, and lots of focus on the family teachings and all that fun stuff.
Awful stuff. Yep.
It was horrible. And so this culture within this university was very similar to my IFB culture.
Okay.
And it felt very comfortable. And so I was like, I'm going to go there. And I actually went there while I was on the waiting list for Moody, because I was going to go to Moody Bible Institute to be a missionary. And so, I mean, got to follow through.
Be the good girl that you are.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do. And my family went to Moody, so that's what I need to do. And so then when I went to college, like, I started noticing, like, what I was wanting was different from what my family and my culture was saying. And so then it, like, really started creating some discrepancy. And so then I started to encounter a lot of coercive control, a lot of psychological and religious abuse, especially from a paternal figure.
Okay.
And then it created a space where I didn't know who I was, because I kept hearing, like, you're such a good person, you're following God, good Christian, to now all of a sudden I'm the prodigal child and I'm horrible and lying, deceptive, controlling, manipulative. Like, all of it was just so confusing. So then I would reach out to other churches in my area or even my Christian college to figure out what was going on. And I kept hearing that, well, you need to forgive. If you forgive, you're angry, forgive. Like, and so it, like, created that space of, like, am I angry? I don't know what to believe anymore. They're like, well, just pray and submit. That's what God wants for you as a single unwed woman, is you need to pray, submit, and God will change their hearts. And then I got in that space of, how can God want this for me? Like, God wants me to be hurt. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. So I ended up just completely leaving the faith, because I'm like, I can't do this. Like, I can't sign up for a God that wants me to be hurt for my good.
But it took something important to allow you to be convinced of that, right? To allow you to be able to say that for yourself. Do you know what that was, or was it just it was I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to ask about? Like, was there a moment or a?
I think there was, like, a culmination.
Yeah.
Because actually there's one day that really stands out to me, because it was a day that I actually got expelled from the college. And my boyfriend broke up with me. And like, it was just a really big, intense day that really got me to the point where I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Like,
yeah. But I'm sorry, keep interrupting you, but I just want to tease out some of this, because first of all, I'm curious, but also I want to make sure others are following. You were expelled because you were asking questions, or you weren't agreeing with things?
Well, I was asking questions, but I also became really angry because I kept getting hurt. And then people kept saying, just keep submitting and keep doing this. And so no matter who I talked to in that culture, they're just like, this is what you need to do. And it really isn't until later in my education I realized, like, anger is letting me know I'm being violated. Like, this is a good thing I need to listen to and not keep silencing.
That's right.
And so whenever I felt that anger or expressed that, they're like, you forgive. Like, it's your fault you're in this situation. And it actually like, I got so many, like, I started having severe depression. I started drinking a significant amount of alcohol because I had insomnia. Like, it was a lot of things. And so that culture, when they looked at it, they were like, well, you're the one who's being rebellious and you're doing all this. So we need to kick you out because you're the problem, and not really seeing the larger context.
Right.
There was one pastor that was really helpful that I ended up signing up for some counseling with. And he's the one that really opened up space of, like, you know what, the more I hear what's going on and the more I interact with this parental figure, the more I'm seeing that this isn't good. Like, you're getting hurt whenever we challenge them on how they treat you. Like, this isn't okay. And so he was actually the first male Christian figure that gave me space to say, you know what, it's okay for me not to submit in this space. Like,
Nice.
which then started more of my deconstruction space. And then I went into family therapy because I'm just like, I want to know why I responded the way I did. I want to understand what's going on because I'm like, our family affects us and it affected me. So what happened? And so within the family therapy, it helped provide a systemic understanding of just how we have all of these different cultures and dynamics and even our body, like everything impacts what's happening. And so we need to look at all these layers because we're not just responding for no reason, or people just don't have a problem for no reason. Like there's something.
Yes.
And it was the first time that I ever had a conversation around diversity. So it was the first, like that one course was really hard for me because my culture taught me, like, we love everyone. It doesn't matter what color, skin, ethnicity, anything. We just love you. And then I'm sitting there, like we had this video about this woman who ended up getting discriminated. And I kept asking, like, well, what does that mean? Like, who determines what's discrimination? Who gets to determine what is abuse or control? Or like, what is this? And so I don't think, being in the culture I was raised in, I don't think a lot of people understood what I was asking.
Yeah.
And so I got like this huge kickback, which was really shocking. But then one of the professors, when I talked to him, he was like, Naomi, go talk to people and ask how they experience you. I was like, oh. And so then I started asking more. And then I started, it really challenged me to recognize my privilege, or how like I experienced the world so differently. And so that was like a huge, like, it was painful, but also really good too, really within my trajectory. So then after that, I started practicing after I graduated, and it was really cool because I got to experience a lot of different people. I worked in child welfare for a while.
Nice.
And so really trying to help bring families together after the children get removed and addressing all those concerns.
Very hard. Yeah.
And I was like, I want to get back into like preserving families. So I switched over to preservation to help with that. And then I started having children and lots of stuff happened. And so then I ended up, well, now I have my own private practice and I love it because I do in-home therapy, which is so fun.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I'm like, I get to go into clients' homes and see their, like,
oh, wow.
It's easier for me to understand.
Yes. And they're more comfortable.
Yeah. Wow. Well, often they are. Sometimes they're not.
Well, then if they were sitting in, that's an interesting point. I was going to say, like, if they come to your office, it's protected from everything back there. Sorry, I'm interrupting again, but I'm like, you're fine. That's an interesting approach. Well, go ahead. Yeah.
And it can be vulnerable to have someone in your space because it's like you're used to this space.
That's true. Yeah.
But also I think for me, it helps me to understand more of what they're talking about or what could be helpful or what questions to ask, because in a controlled office space, I'm like, I'm missing so much. And I don't see things. So I think going into people's homes and being able to see more of what people are experiencing and living with, like that really affected me.
And so they're not even aware often of the dynamics that they're living in, perpetuating, whatever it is. Gosh, just out of curiosity, did you make that decision, or did someone else suggest, like, model this practice for you? I'm just curious.
A combination of both, because within the child welfare, the job I had was I did go into parents' homes and work with them. And some of that is to address like the transportation issues or daycare issues, because especially in this population, generally, they're more lower income and have more limited access to resources. And so then I fell in love with it when I started, and I'm like, it's just what I do now, and I love it. Although I also do telehealth because COVID hit, so it's a mixture.
Okay.
But then I got into my dissertation because I was like, if I'm doing this, I want to do it. So then I got into I wanted to further understand like what's happening in people's world, and not even just people's world, but also recognize globally, how do like even the wars that are happening overseas, how is that affecting us and how we're making meaning? And so that gets more into like that global diversity, and how even me, if I was in a different country with a similar context, but different location, could make different meaning as well. So it's like, it's very interesting. But it also helped me further explore like what it means to be a person who has privilege and power, and what it means when you don't, and also the intersectionalities when you look at like gender and sexual orientation or ethnicity or socioeconomic status or even disability. And able-bodied, like what those look like. And then how do you stand up for the injustices happening in the world? And how do you do that in therapy? And so it's a very interesting topic.
It is.
But
It is.
I ended up focusing on how the white fundamental evangelical culture makes meaning around mental illness. Because growing up, I heard a lot of, oh, if you have anxiety or depression, lack of faith, it's sin.
Yes, right. No wonder so many people, even if they're not super conservative, are afraid to get help, right? Because of this, anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started.
You did some research on that, on how that all ties together.
Because I wanted to understand like the cult. I'm like, this doesn't just happen. Like somehow we're making this meaning.
Right.
And so really diving into like, so how are we getting this understanding, which then helped me get more into the formulation of the wheel, because I'm starting to see all these factors.
Yes.
And it was also so interesting because I was going through this process. I was also still pretty active within more fundamentalist churches because it still felt really comfortable. So I ended up going back into church because I was like, it's important.
Oh, wow.
And we got connected with one church that like my nervous system was on edge. Like I could tell this was like really close to the IFB culture. And I'm like, I don't know about this. But like the more I asked questions, the more the church did not like it.
Yeah.
And so we were part of a small group. And I remember that like so clearly, like, because I do a lot of posting on my Facebook. And some of the members were also friends on my Facebook. And so they brought in the elder of the group and was like, okay, so if we have people that are causing issues or they're not being
following the line,
like we take them to the door and like show them to the door and tell them not to come back. And then they turn to me and they're like, so Naomi, tell us about your Facebook.
Wow.
Like it looks like you have a lot of questions and what's going on. And they did not like that I integrate psychology within my practice because they're like, it's worldly, human wisdom, not good. And so then I'm like, this isn't safe. And so I shut down and then we ended up slowly teasing out and then COVID hit. So it was like a natural, like I'm disconnecting. But then it's like even some of those members, like one of them wrote a letter to me. And in this letter, it was just like, oh, well, there's a battle for your soul and you don't understand what's happening. And psychology just turned you away from God. And she even went as far to call James Dobson and his organization on my behalf. Like, it's just, so I sit there like,
wait. I'm sorry. This woman was so concerned about you. She actually got James Dobson in her corner to attack you?
Talk to James Dobson because he's too busy. So it's his secretary. But like they're like all trying to, and she's like, yeah, it's like a common thing. Like we encourage her to talk to the Christian Association for Christian Counselors and all of that.
That's scary. Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there like, how is it that as Christians we feel like this is okay? That's like we're using other people with power to try to get people to respond a way. We're trying to follow like certain rule, like, and so that's also what sort of contributed to this wheel of me getting more curious of how are we doing this? And then we feel justified. Like, right. This is loving to hurt. This is loving to go to someone else when I don't know the story, but trying to get them to say you're wrong because you're not listening to me. Like all of that was really baffling to me.
Yeah.
And so that's what led to more of the wheel stuff that as we get further into it.
Yeah. Okay. I want to kind of interject a little bit here because there are a couple comments and questions that are going on that I would like you to be able to address. One, I didn't say it up front, but I did link for everybody watching or with us live or watching later. I did put Dr. Norton's website in the description, as well as the link to the article that we're going to pull up here in just a minute to have Dr. Norton kind of talk us through some of that. But there are a couple comments, and I love. There's someone here goes by Farsight, and I think that the question is also an observation. It's not a challenge, but the comment is. What they said is, what's the difference between this kind of Christianity and a cult again? Like, what's the difference here? So many red flags. Why am I not just putting it up here? I'm sorry. So many red flags justifying and perpetuating abusive behavior. And I'm also wondering, before we go look at the wheel, even though the wheel kind of helps explain this, if you can say a little bit, kind of tease out a little bit what you mean when you talk about religious abuse.
Well, when I think of religious abuse, well, I'm going to step back first before I do that. Many times when people think of abuse, they think of physical or sexual. That's like you need proof and hard facts to say that this is happening. And so then even within my experience and even understanding more of how humans respond to even psychological abuse or coercion or even the religious side, that it's like we start to see behavioral responses, that it's like there are things that are highlighting that something's happening. And so often when we talk about even religious abuse, it's like, well, that's not happening because it's just religion. Like it's God says this, like it's not abuse. Like you're just trying to live in sin. And it's sitting there and it's like, no, we're going to step back further because we're creating a structure where we're taking away people's agency and autonomy. And we're saying you have to do this because we know what's right. And if you don't, then bad things happen. And it's not even just eternal. Generally, you also get a community response as well, because you either lose family or you get so like Bible thumping on you, or you get a lot of just a lot of shame. And then if you don't follow, then they end up creating more like, oh, well, now you are a threat. And so then they start attacking and labeling. And so a lot of that is what creates more of that like religious abuse, because they're abusing within a religious structure, which takes even more agency and autonomy, because how are you going to fight when someone uses your higher power? That it's like your higher power says this. And it's like, I mean, it's
you can't talk back to that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And I know that looking at the wheel will help. I just want to do one other quick comment here. Just, I think it'll be helpful if April's probably not the only one wondering, because you mentioned this, that your doctorate involves social justice as a field of study. So can you say a little bit more about that? And then we'll go look at your wheel.
So within my degree, like my focus is family therapy. So it's looking at systems and how they all impact an individual and vice versa. And so within the social justice, it adds a framework for us to recognize, like, where are those who are being marginalized? Where are those that have less power, that are being affected by how the structure is set up in the system? And then how do we go in and advocate for those who are being hurt or are more at risk of being harmed? Whether it's within the legal system or even just within how certain family systems are structured, or even religiously, that's like we have a hierarchy generally that tends to tell us what to do. And so looking at that of like, is this a healthy hierarchy? Is this really what we need to be doing? And who's getting hurt? And how do we protect them? And how do we advocate for them? And not just say it's your fault because you sinned. Like there's more than that.
There's way more to it than that. Yes. All right. I think I'm going to take myself out here. I didn't realize my audio is removed when I do that. Sorry about that. Okay. Do I do it this way? Sorry, I should have played around with this first. So we're going to have to just do it this way. I'm going to pull up your... See, I talk it through so everybody knows that, like, I don't know what I'm doing. The first few times I did a live stream at all, it was like on my phone and my laptop, and I was just like, I don't know what's happening here. And so
we'll figure it out together.
So everybody knows. Yeah. We have a wheel here. Is everybody seeing this?
I can see it.
I think so. And I was trying to make it bigger, but that was all the best I could do. So I was wondering if there's a way I can. Yeah, sorry. I think that's the best I'll be able to zoom in instead of. So here's one of the wheels that you've created. What would you like to tell us about this?
Well, I think, like, first I like to let people know that this is not an end all be all. Like, this is just a structure to hopefully help people start to get curious in how do cultural influences affect how we connect with the religion, how it's structured, how information is passed down, and then ultimately how we interact as individuals within this religious structure. And there's a lot of things that still need to be added. Like I need to add in ableism and even economics. And I'm like, I can't do everything in this. And also these principles can be applied within different religious structures, that these ideologies could just be a little different. But you can see like how larger cultural influences shape how we make meaning.
Okay. Yes. And again, I know that we can look at this and kind of put those pieces together, but pretend that I don't understand what I'm looking at, right? Can you help me see and kind of put to words what we're looking at here?
Yes. So this was adapted by the Duluth model of power and control. They were formulated because they were noticing within the court systems that there were other ways that women were being controlled by their partners. And the court system wasn't recognizing that because they're just like, well, you're not getting hurt. And sexually, that's still on the fence because you're married or together. So you can't really say sexually. And so there was a whole bunch of paralegals that got together and started talking and interviewing lots of women. And they started recognizing all these different areas that were being used in order to get women to fall in line. And so from there, like that was sort of the basis. But then like as I expanded and incorporated a lot of my literature, I was recognizing that there's themes of the patriarchy, there's themes of the purity culture, there's themes of even white supremacy ideology or dominion theology, and even Christian nationalism that are really creating like all these meanings that we're making around lots of things, whether it's mental illness or other things.
Okay.
And then,
sorry, go ahead. No, well, I just wanted to comment on the fact that it was paralegals who got together to do this, not the attorneys.
No.
I think this is really interesting, and I'm sorry that I'm kind of backtracking in your story here,
you're fine.
but it is interesting because those are people in general who are doing a lot of the work and don't have power in the same way, right, than the people that they're working for do. And it's not a surprise to me, but it's also worth noting, right, that people, it's the paralegals who decided to do this. And to highlight, to give some sort of, to highlight the interconnectedness here. Yes. Okay, I've interrupted you, so go ahead.
And it's also interesting though, because a lot of people will use that as a reason to discredit it. Because it's like, well, you don't have power, you're not an expert, you're just a paralegal, so this can't be right. And so that was one of the things I was hoping to also address of like, well, I'm educated in systems, so I can see, and even within responses, because I'm like, I'm in the mental health field. And so when someone experiences abuse, that there are these typical responses that people have. And so being able to bring it together to say, even this power and control wheel, like even though it's written by paralegals, that it still has a lot of validity to it that we need to be looking at and assessing, because it puts language to dynamics that are happening that a lot of people don't want to see, because it's like, I mean, if it's physical, that's all we're looking for.
Right. So I actually just want you to do a little bit, it might feel weird to you, but talk us through what we're seeing here in this part of the wheel. Like how should somebody, what is somebody going to see differently now if they sit with this part of your wheel?
So with it, I'm hoping it, as a big picture, it starts to narrow down to recognize like how faith is being interacted with.
Okay.
And so on the outside, I have some of those larger ideologies of looking at the patriarchy and purity culture and white supremacy and Christian nationalism. And then inside of like some smaller concepts within those to look at, that it's like we're looking at authoritarianism and colonization and even sexual purity, or I forget.
It is, sexual purity is over,
and like being hyper focused on sex, like how all of that shapes things. And then you get down into how the Bible is getting translated, because I think many people have a belief that when the Bible is being translated or when we're interpreting, that there's no bias, that it's just a complete removal and it's just from God.
Right.
And it's like, that's not how we work. Like when you look at how people make meaning, we make meaning through our own identity and our culture.
Right.
And so we're not even recognizing within the faith how it's like we have all of these being, it's shaping how things are being translated and understood.
Right.
But then you also get to, what is it? The inerrancy belief.
Okay.
That ends up really being weaponized as saying like, well, this is what's in the Bible because this is what the Bible says, and not recognizing how that also instilled a lot of cultural beliefs into it and interpretations. And a lot of time those who have more power were able to put their framework within this religious text. And so then the text ends up getting misused because of how we're not understanding all of it. And so then it gets into like how it's disseminated within the Christian circles, because I mean, there's radio stations, there's books there. I mean, it's everywhere. And so we're constantly getting primed to hear a certain way and believe a certain way. And so then you end up getting to, I mean, misusing the scripture. And then you get down into more of those individual sections that can be used for coercive control. And I like to say this too, because when I say coercive control, I don't necessarily equate that to ill intent or purposely trying to harm someone.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of people distance from that. So like, well, I wasn't meaning to hurt someone. And it's like, that's not like, that's okay. And also hurt and harm was still encountered. And many times we're taught to behave a certain way. It's like, if I see someone on the street, you go and you evangelize. Like you tell them you're a sinner and you tell them all this, like that's what you do. And so it's just like, well, yes and no, like that's not a healthy way. And so even looking at how do I interact with other people and why do I believe that this is okay? So we can start teasing things out and even like deconstruct on a deeper level that many times I think we stop within the religious text or the religious culture. And I firmly believe we need to look at larger culture as well, because it is really shaping everything. So it's like we can leave and go to another faith and we still have the similar issues because we're not looking at the contributing factors or even how we make meaning ourselves. So yeah, so that's, I did lots of talking.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to kind of tease out some of what you're saying because I'm tracking and I understand, but I want to make sure that people who aren't familiar with all these ideas and concepts, have a chance to kind of sit with it a little bit or have it teased out for them a little bit. So that's all what I'm trying to do here. Yeah, I mean, how many layers do you have going on here? It's really, it's pretty powerful when you think about it, right? You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 7 layers of 7 layers of social dynamics or belief systems. When you talk about ideologies, you're talking about belief systems, right? This is really powerful, and to see the 7 layers, right? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I just think even for those of us who experience some of this abuse, like many times I think there's a way for us to be gaslighted because it's just like you shouldn't be responding or behaving the way you are. And so then being able to conceptualize it and be like, there's so much that's going on. Like it makes sense that I don't want to go to church or go towards this space. Or when I hear certain things about I just need to pray, how that affects me. Or when someone just like invites me to coffee, like I know what's going to happen. Like it's like
I know this is not going to be pleasant for me,
right? It's like, unless and even recognizing that it's like there is like power dynamics and there is like that coercive side of trying to get you, like, and even like certain people like we're here to talk. I'm like, are you really here to talk? Or are you here like to talk until I get to where you are, but you're not willing to hear my side? Like
I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I'm just laughing at that is a nice way to, right? Like, really? Is that really what you want to do? Should we go look at the other wheel? Because they're both they both have powerful things that they're presenting. Yeah.
The middle one, I tried to include some examples.
Yes.
And I'd like to add in that these do not equate directly to coercive control. And these are ones that can be used that way. And there's also things not included. So it's like, these are just examples. Like, it's not an end all be all. But like looking like at male privilege of how females are treated like servants or less than, that men primarily get to make the decisions. Going into like controlling sexuality, gender, and reproduction, where it's like those who have more power and privilege off of how we're interpreting the Bible, we're saying like this, you're wrong. Like you can't possibly know your body and your lived experience and what's happening for you. We're going to go in and control that, or even trying to control birth control or even abortion. Like all of that is really creating, like we're trying to control people's bodies.
Yes.
So it's like that is a form of the coercive control.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I may, there are reasons why conservative communities do that. And in part because the scriptures that they tend to depend upon teach them to do that. They do set up an expectation that in particular in a binary way of talking about gender, which I believe in beyond the binary, but in terms of scripture, men get to control women's bodies, and women's bodies are predominantly not entirely, but predominantly
Mhm.
focused on through this element of, procreation. So when people do that, I think it's important to note that they're taught well by their own scriptures, which
Okay.
then perpetuate within the tradition, and the tradition perpetuates the ideas
Mhm.
about the scriptures. So yes, back to you. Okay.
Well, and it's so true. And like my hopes is that people are able to start to work out what they believe and distance from some of this fear to recognize what is cultural. So I don't have to sit there and feel like I'm going to hell if I'm questioning this. Or if because in the end, it's like I'm just really trying to work out what I believe and love other people and like figure out how do I live in community. Which is interesting because even as I say it, I'm like, I tell people, I'm like, I have an IFB voice in my head because I've been so indoctrinated.
Right.
That's
Right.
like, even as I say that, it's like, I get this, oh, but Naomi, I mean, there needs to be a limit. Like like sin is sin and God says this is sin. And it's just like, hold up, like silent, like.
It's still in there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to take time for that to go away, isn't it?
Yeah. Especially when you're taught as a child.
Yes.
It's like one of the books that I really liked is Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes. And in that one, they really highlight like how when you're little, you're taught something and your brain development isn't to the point where you can question. So it gets built into your belief system. And it's like, it's to the point where it's like, I can't question that because that's just
it
truth.
just is.
Like it just is.
Yep.
And how dangerous, like, and that's some of this, I don't want to say like it's dangerous, but it does have a lot of dangerous components when we're treating children this way, especially in really high controlling religions. That's like, we may have good intentions and living out what we believe. And also we're creating the structure where they end up warring with themselves and they don't understand why, because it's like, I don't believe this. And like, it's all great.
Right. And in particular, when we start talking about sex and sexuality and sexual experimentation and orientations and ideas and beliefs, like it's very, very harmful for the most part.
And even thinking of women in leadership and how it's like a lot of people just can't bring themselves to sign up for a church like that, or even in politics. Like if a woman is up for president, like, do we feel like we're able to even vote for a woman? Like it's
yes.
so
And there's a direct connection between these two things, right?
Well, and these all intersect too. Like I think many times people think Christian nationalism is on one side, where I'm like, no, when you look at Christian nationalism and patriarchy, like they blend together, and the patriarchy and purity culture go together. Like all of these overlap.
Okay, pause. All right. Tease that out for us a little bit, please.
Okay.
When you say Christian nationalism and patriarchy are all of the same cloth or whatever, can you a little bit slower? Can we just talk us through that, if you don't mind?
They're all individual, but then they also get fused together. And so it's like I think sometimes it's hard to tease out what is Christian nationalism and what is patriarchy. So a lot of times, especially in America, when you see them interacting, you're seeing how it's a lot of men that are saying this is what needs to be done. And God has called us because of our position of authority to create a Christian nation. And so it's like you see that interact. And then also with white supremacy, because it's like, well, like we understand like what is pure, what is right, what needs to get done. Like God has ordained us within this space to be able to do that. And so it's like you see all these merging together, which I believe there's also like this propaganda where it's like, if we can stigmatize one or two of these, then we can get rid of all of it. Where it's like, when we look at Christian nationalism and people start talking of white supremacy, like, oh, white supremacy, like you're racist and all this. It's like, no, like you're not interacting honestly with what's being discussed. Like you're trying to find a reason to discredit and throw things out where it's like white supremacy, like, and I even highlight this, that white supremacy ideology is not exclusive to those with white skin. But it's also, it is how we are taught that we have to privilege white hermeneutics or white way of living is what we need to be doing in order to be civilized or educated, or like, this is what we need to do. And we need to pass this on to other people. Like people of color, the BIPOC community can also be assimilated within this ideology and how even that affects Christian nationalism. And then you get like tokenism, like it's just it's all fascinating and super complex, but really cool. You start to see it all play out.
Agreed. Is there anything else you want to say about this particular wheel? I do see your question, Erin. We'll get to that in just a minute. I appreciate you all. So I'm going to take a moment right now, right? Okay. I'm going to take your your silence, we'll just do this. We do have at least one question. And so if you all have questions for Dr. Norton, I would love it if you put those in the chat. And if I've missed one earlier, because I pulled out a couple, but I might have missed one earlier, if you could repost it, that'd be great. I'm going to share this one for now. From Aaron Colson. Hi there, Aaron. And thank you for your support, by the way. Can Dr. Norton talk about how socioeconomics or poverty both intersect with patriarchy and Christian nationalism? I'm going to leave the question up for a little bit just so people know what you're engaging here.
So one thing I'll admit is I am not, I don't understand economics very well.
Yeah. Okay.
And also with it, it's something I'm further exploring.
Sure.
One thing I do like to add in is a book by Dr. Isabella Wilkinson. It's called Caste.
Yes.
And it's one that, I think that really opened up my eyes into how, even within the question, how it's white supremacy ideology also created this caste system where you end up getting those with lower socioeconomic status and those undesirables that are down there, and they have less power and privilege. But then you see those who are higher up, how they're the ones dictating all of the laws and regulations. And even within the Christian nationalism, you get people who believe that we need to create a religious structure in order to bring God's divine goodness back down to earth. We need, if we're following God, we get blessed. So to make America great again, we need to create this more theocracy and force people to live our way. And even seeing those who live in poverty, where it's it's your fault because you made poor choices. You were not good stewards of what God gave you. And if you were operating, not recognizing how it's a lot of those who are within minority demographics, it's you see how they all intersect and how many times they have less power and privilege. And at the same time, they have less ability to create change because they have less power.
And that's access to resources.
It's such a self-feeding system.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for that question and for your comments about that behavior.
Well, and I also, there's one thing too, because as I was thinking of the question as well, many times within coercive control, one way of doing that is by controlling finances.
Yes.
Because if you don't have finances, then you tend to have to stay within that structure. I mean, even when you look at abusive relationships, one will be working and one won't, or won't have access to income, because especially within how America is structured, money is power. We need that money in order to create change. And so you see how all that also does intersect and create a coercive space.
And coercive space, also the isolation part that I saw in both of your wheels, I think, but right, the control of the body, the control of who the other person gets to interact with, all the different dynamics. Yeah, very much so. Do we have any other questions for Dr. Norton while she's here? Oh my goodness. There's some really interesting comments. Okay, I'm going to go put this one out here. So that's a workaround on the... So the court case, Oregon versus Rideout in 1978, was the first in which someone stood trial for his spouse while they lived together. It's interesting. It wasn't 1978. By 1993, marital abuse of this form was a crime nationwide. It was a crime nationwide, but I think this is a really interesting point, Pragmatic Crystal. Thank you for your presence here and your comments. I actually know that the state of Tennessee didn't pass it as a law. It went up for, they tried to pass the law. It took 15 tries. So 15 years in a row. Right. One of a group of legislatures were trying to put this in law, that it is possible for a man to do this to his spouse. And again, it's a very hetero framework, but it took 15 tries because there were that many white males in the legislature who said it's not possible for me to do that to my wife because she's my wife. She signed up for this. So many pieces of this and that's tied to, and Tennessee is a very conservative Christian state, right? It's outside of the big cities. So I think that's interesting that there was an intent or it took a while for it to actually, I think it was the early 2000s before it actually passed in Tennessee. Just anecdotal or just one example, but but where, who are we? What century are we in? And we're still having these conversations about whether or not it's possible. I have.
Well,
Go ahead.
I think even within the legal system, it's because you can't have this law or statute, but then it's how it's being interpreted by other people. And then even how dehumanizing it is to have to go to court to say someone is forcing themselves on me and I don't want that. Like, I have to defend my own agency and autonomy from my spouse, and no one else recognizes that. Like, it's just like, once you say I do, then I do forever. Like, what is wrong with it? And so it's like,
No, I had someone actually say that I did a video on consent in the Bible, and I had several males challenge what I was saying. And one did say, what else do you need? All you need is the certificate of marriage. That's her signing her. I have to laugh at that. I'm like, I know that you believe that. Right. It's just, because I think I'd said something about, well, even though you're married, you still need to have a little some sort of communication going on that you're up for it, like in the moment, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever way you choose to do that. But no, I don't. Okay. So many layers. That's the thing. That's what I love about the visuals that you've created. It's just showing the numerous layers, systemic dynamics that you're talking about, and they do feed each other, right? They do build upon each other. I imagine it took some time for you to sort through which layers went where in terms of where this is right, where this particular idea is coming from and versus what it is feeding, I imagine that took some time.
And even how they all intersect. So it's like you get this feedback loop that it's like, it's hard to say where it started because I feel like we get to the chicken or the egg, which from what I know of how humans make meaning, I'm like, generally it's from us and how we make sense of things. And you see even in all these other cultures where it's like you have a culture and then religion is like within that culture. So it's like, I have the belief that it's more of these cultural ideologies that end up shaping how we make meaning of the divine and the religious text and what needs to be done. And so I believe it's more outside. But I know other people have different opinions, which is fine. We can all have different opinions. And I do think they all intersect and overlap with each other. And it's hard to say. And in the end, I don't know that it matters. In the end, it's still a problem that we need to address on all fronts, within the religion and the larger culture.
I have another question for you here. Again, from Aaron Colson. Does religious ideology drive political ideology? Or does political ideology shape theology?
I don't know that I can outright say one, because I think a lot of it depends on the person and also their power and privilege and what's happening. And I think a lot of people, I think more research needs to be done in that to really assess.
Okay.
Because I do see a lot of Christians who are well, because of my religious beliefs, I have to have a political. But then I also step back and is but your religious beliefs are also outside of this, which is it's not just religious beliefs. So it's hard to tease out which one shapes what, but they both do influence each other, which I think is what makes it hard because people know religion is powerful. So if they can make something that's political, a moral understanding, people will follow. So it's you end up seeing that fusion, which is so dangerous.
Yes. Yes. I actually, what's interesting on that is I remember, especially in my 20s when I was very conservative, fundamentalist, kind of a evangelical Christian, we talked about not being political because, I'm not into, politics, that's just of the world. And so I don't want anything to do with it. I'm not political. I don't, as if just saying that I don't care about politics means that I'm not political. I really believed that, even though that's not how it works either, I don't know. Were there people in your community that?
Well, our community taught within my history class, I was taught that you need to vote for the party, not the person. And so it was ingrained all the time, which I'm like, when you're doing that, you're also advancing this agenda, but you don't know that because you're taught as a good Christian, you vote Republican. This is what you do. And then here's why, because we support life and we support that. Like, you need to do it this way. If you don't, bad things happen from God. Like, and so it does get really coercive to, I mean, politics is, I struggle with that, but also like there's a movement too where it's like women shouldn't vote because they're so easily deceived. So we need to like let men do all the voting and decide what happens, and more heterosexual men. And it's just like,
it's the
scary.
idea has been out there for centuries, right? It's not a new one, and it and it keeps getting
reframed and repackaged, but it's the same thing. Because like even when I talk about patriarchy, a lot of people like, it's not the patriarchy. I'm like, you're right, it's complementarianism, but it's still the patriarchy. It's the same ideology underneath. Like it's like
Thank you, Jason, for the super chat. And yes, wanted you to see this. Make sure you saw that one, Dr. Norton. So yeah. This has been lovely and engaging, and you are doing some really important work. I think I value the work you're doing. I love the visuals. I think visuals are so helpful for people because, like you said, so much of what people believe and do, really the not obvious things in our lives, right? There's so many dynamics that we are all engaging in every day without even knowing it or being conscious of it. And so the visual, putting words to so many things, I really appreciate it. I think it's really helpful. Visuals, it's helpful to kind of give people some language, how to talk about these things. Why, as you said in your story and some of your experiences, why am I getting anxious just thinking about going to coffee with this person or whatever? Why is that space scary to me? What's going on? We are really interesting beings, I think, as human beings, and there's a lot going on there that your work is trying to address.
One reason why I think it's like, I think there's a huge propaganda to make people not be connected with their emotions and their bodies. So it's like, it gives us information, but if we just say emotions are all bad, then we don't listen. And that like, you just have to over spiritualize, which then gives certain people more influence. And we're not able to make a wise mind decision of like, what is my emotions? What is my body? What are my experiences? Who are other people from different perspectives experiencing? So we can understand. And many times we create ourselves in like the bubble where it's like, this is the only thing, it's the only thing safe. So I can't think outside, and how that further instills these beliefs in people's lives and what they believe. Like there's so many dynamics that I'm like, if we're able to slow it down and think through and be able to have more choice and agency, that's like, we can really start to advance in creating a different structure and challenging the harmful sides. And it's not just because many times in religion, it's like, well, you're just fighting the higher power. You're just fighting you. And it's like, So it's like when we're able to alter, not even just alter, but recognize, no, we're not fighting against the higher power. We're focusing on how we're creating meaning and how we're understanding things. So we need to reflect on that part, like not deviate the conversation.
Right. Deflect, right. Deflecting from it. Yes. Well, I want to honor your time. Do stick around, by the way, Naomi, after this. I want to chat with you afterwards. Thank you, Dr. Norton, for being with us today. And thank you to all of you who were here, able to be interested in being here, able to be here live with us. Thank you for your questions, your engagement, and for those watching later. I appreciate all the things that you all do to support the work I'm trying to do. I appreciate when you like and subscribe and hit the bell, get the notifications. I appreciate all the people who've supported me as patrons through my Patreon account and talking and helping me spread the word about my latest book, all the different things I'm trying to do to share some more informed ways of engaging the Bible. So thank you all, and I'll see you all next week.